The 68-year-old Lord Seb Coe is a top contender for the IOC presidency. A former middle-distance running star of the 1970s and 80s, Coe was a multiple world record holder and a two-time Olympic champion. Today, he is a respected sports leader with a strong track record. His athletic achievements, academic background in economics and social sciences, and business experience make him a strong candidate. His years in the UK's House of Lords also prepared him for the challenges of the international sports politics. Coe led London's successful 2012 Olympic bid and organised one of the most highly regarded games. Since 2015, he has served as president of the World Athletics, now in his third and final term. Many see this as a perfect launchpad for the IOC role, but his push for the Olympic prize money reform could be an obstacle in his campaign. When I was looking at your fantastic background, you're a man of victory in many cases, of course, coming from competitive sports and then turning into politics and then, of course, sport diplomacy, sports leadership. But to be a candidate for IOC presidency, you have 6 other contenders. So I'm wondering, what do you think when the final decision will be made? What will be the most, I would say, crucial factor on the decision makers? Personality, athletic background, maybe the way you look at the future of IOC, your plans, or altogether?
I think it is inevitably a suffusion, a synthesis of all those things.
Of course.
And that's the way it should be. The presidency of the IOC is a very high-profile, honoured position. And it is outward-facing. It is not a chief executive. You have plenty of really talented people, or you should have plenty of talented people, in a headquarters to be fulfilling that function.
Right.
The role of an IOC president is to help create the landscape where every one of the Olympic stakeholders feels that they have an ability to shape and to structure the future. And my instinct at the moment is that you have some very talented people in the membership. You have world-class business leaders, male and female. You have politicians, you have members of royal families, you have coaches, you have educators, you have cultural leaders, and you have experience that is almost unmatched. In fact, many of those individuals would comfortably and would be very highly sought after on global boards. Do we have the right structure to allow the challenges that we know lie ahead of us and the opportunities that sit alongside those challenges? Do we have the governance structures that allow us to independently and internally shape that future? And so I hope that when my colleagues, the membership, make that judgment, they make it across a series of metrics. And there are some very talented candidates, and I'm delighted that as many candidates as there are have thrown their hat in the ring and want to help shape the future. So it is down to the membership, and that is the way it should be. It can only be that way. But the membership need not just to have a voice.
Right.
They need to have structures through which that voice can not just be heard, but can be acted upon and can help shape the future. And that's about the membership, it's about commissions, it's about working groups, it's about the effectiveness of the executive board, and it is also about the way the president's office is connected right across that landscape. And how do you bring the people, those organizations that will also help us shape the future, like our commercial partners? They are world-class people, they are world-class organizations, they employ world-class people. They should be helping us also understand and navigate the future, broadcast as well. And the group that has to sit, absolutely has to sit, center stage with no ambiguity at all, are of course the athletes.
Yes.
Because none of this makes any sense if you don't have the athletes sitting at the center of the project.
We will come back to that topic. I'm really interested in your opinion on that. But since we mentioned personality, if you allow us, if you allow me, we would go on a little bit on a personal matter. Let's start with the difficult one, the age issue that they have been mentioning. And it doesn't mean that you are not in the best of your potentials in all senses. But of course, if you were elected to be an IOC president, it seems like that you will not be able to re-elect it. So if I'm thinking of in terms of legacy, what an IOC president can create and leave, you only would have 4 years to do that. Isn't it like discouraging in a way?
Well, look, let's be clear. I was deemed eligible to stand.
Okay.
And my assumption is that along with that eligibility goes the ability to serve a full term.
Okay.
And that is what I intend to do. But
Which is 4 years, a full term is 4
only
years.
intend to do that as long as the membership think that is appropriate. And it is ultimately up to the membership. And when we come to talk about age, I think, you don't mind me saying, I think this is a rather analog conversation.
Yes.
In 2024. Age is not an indicator of anything.
No,
and it's certainly not an indicator of physical physical ability or cognitive powers.
Right.
So I think that's a rather old-fashioned way of looking at the nature of world-class organizations. No other organization would think like that.
What about, because this is the other issue that they have been mentioning regarding your candidacy, is the conflict of interest regarding being an IF president at the moment as a president of World Athletics. And then if you were elected to be an IOC president, then it should be the two positions probably would collide either.
It's very clear. You would need a change of status. And I think it's a very sensible proposition that there is a transitional period. You know, any candidate that is successful in March has until the end of June to get all those governance issues in place. And believe me, I know how to do that. I've done it throughout my whole career, both as a government minister, as a politician, as chair of the London Organising Committee, and chair of the bid committee, and certainly as president of World Athletics. Those are the sorts of things that I get right.
Absolutely. And we were talking about that, of course, the IOC members will be the audience that you have to convince about your ideas regarding the future. But I was thinking, if there was a chance for the athletes, that they had a chance to choose their president, I'm definitely sure that they would want to choose one who is really taking care of the athletes' well-being, of the rewards, of the financial rewards, what they can earn. And from that perspective, you are one of probably the first real pioneer to do that. I remember that coming up with the idea before the Olympic Games to have financial reward for the competitors in track and field, which was not really well received by IOC, and it was even judged by other international federations presidents. But it seems like that you're very strict on that. And today, when we had this press conference with the Athletics Ultimate World Championships, it seems to be that you definitely want to move to the direction to give more and more back to the athletes on the financial basis as well.
In 1981, I was the first athlete to be given the honor of addressing an International Olympic Committee Congress in Germany. And I spoke on behalf of the athletes.
That was a Baden-Baden?
In Baden-Baden. And I hope that I captured, together with Thomas Bach, and Kip Keino and Pal Schmidt and some pioneers in that field, Michelle Ford, the Australian swimmer. I hope that I managed to capture the essence of those 2 or 3 days together when we were discussing the role of the athletes going forward. So in that 4-minute presentation, I talked about the welfare of the athlete.
All right.
I talked about the scourge of doping and the damage that doping would do to our sport. I also talked about providing athletes with financial security. And I think that can be done without damaging the foundations or the very philosophy of the Olympic movement. But we do have to recognize.
But I think that was the point, what they tried to sort of argue on, how much it would affect the original ideology of to be an Olympian.
Look,
it's not about money, but of course
I have been involved.
It's a different age.
I've been involved in the Olympic. If we're going to talk about age, let's be open about this.
Okay.
I have been involved in the Olympic movement for well over 50 years. I have chaired an organising committee. I've won the right to stage a games. I now chair World Athletics. I've been an Olympic champion, and I've also been the president of a National Olympic Committee.
You cannot ask for more.
I don't think there's anything on that CV would show that I am anything other than a passionate believer in the power and the strength of the Olympic movement to change lives and allow young people to fashion their futures through sport. So there is nothing that I am going to do that is going to chip away at those foundation stones. But we also have to be really clear. The world has changed. The challenges now that confront young people in choosing to do anything is inordinately different than it was even 5 years ago.
Absolutely.
And the world changes every 5 minutes. So I don't think it is entirely unreasonable to allow the athletes to have some financial security off the back of games, which in large part are bringing sponsors and broadcast revenue to the table because of their God-given talents. But it can be done in a way that is respectful of the Olympic movement. And this is something that I have always been clear and passionate about. But I have done this in World Athletics, but of course I recognize that if I became president of the
IOC.
International Olympic Committee, any changes in that direction would of course be worked up alongside the National Olympic Committees and also the international federations. That's why I believe so passionately about empowering our stakeholders to make those decisions. They're not unilaterally made by one person or an executive board. They have to share the ambitions and the aspirations of all the stakeholders, because if we don't move together at the same pace, then the movement will disintegrate.
But do you think that they would be open to the idea to actually open up this opportunity and have financial reward for all the Olympians participating in the Olympic Games?
I'm not going to assume anything, because this is an election and elections, often turn up surprises, and I'm like every other candidate. I'm working hard to give myself the best chance of that, and that's not on a personal basis. I actually genuinely think that having been involved in the Olympic movement for as long as I have, frankly, I've been in training for this job my whole life, ever since I put a pair of running shoes on at the age of 11. I have a very clear vision about what I think the movement can achieve in the next 10, 15 years. And I also have a plan which will be very clear.
Yes, that's going to be probably a new chapter opening up. Talking about sponsorship that you mentioned, we have a quite successful game behind us in Paris. However, you could see the two major global sponsors, Toyota and Panasonic, just moved out from the sponsorship and to be a global partner of IOC. And they said that the reason why they decided, because they were quite dissatisfied with the way the money was spent within the Olympic movement. So how can you attract in the future big companies, which is essential to create that financial basis that IOC is basically redividing to the international and to the National Olympic Committees, if two global sponsors have that kind of, I would say, opinion and summary of what they experienced so far?
Well, look, we've talked a lot about my career directly related to sport, whether it's National Olympic Committees or international federations or even as a competitor. But I have spent the last 30 years in the sports marketing business.
And I know that you have a financial degree as well. So.
And that is my and that is my specialty.
All right.
So I know what is an attractive proposition for sponsors. I know when sponsors tend to leave an organization because they're not getting what they need.
So you're not surprised by these two companies leaving the
It
IOC?
is absolutely critical that the International Olympic movement understands and is able to articulate its values, its value proposition. And we have a commercial program that has served the International Olympic Committee extremely well. It was created in the games that I competed in 1984 by Peter Uberoth, who really was, in a way, the creator of the modern Olympic movement, given the number of innovations that he brought to the table. He had to. He had very little finance to play with at that time. But it is pretty clear to me now that although that program has served the movement very well, we need to be more realistic about the types of partners and how we can blend the new partnerships with the existing major partners, because they need protection and they are contributing significantly to the revenues of the organization. But the world of sponsorship and partnership has dramatically altered in the last few years, and I don't think the International Olympic movement has followed those trends as well as it should, and as well as other sports have. And if you look particularly in the United States at the new broadcast numbers around NFL, NBA, even baseball, the new emerging sports, particularly in Asia, and the ability for us to connect through those markets into really important markets that will create the agent of change and improve and enhance the global excitement around the games, we need to think about this very differently. And there are partners that I know, because I've discussed it with them, that would come into the Olympic movement, but maybe it's a little bit too restrictive. And these are the things that the membership needs to confront. And believe me, there are people in that membership that are very capable, because this is the world they inherit, that they inhabit, are very, very capable of helping shape that. And it's those voices, free and focused, that I want at the table.
And if you're talking about attractiveness, it's also the sports that are on the Olympic program is always a question. Urban sports are taking place and, of course, taking a room as opposed to some of the traditional sports. And there were some opinions that who were not so satisfied and happy about this kind of movement, saying that probably IOC doesn't really believe its product. That's why it's changing the directions, leaving the traditional sports behind and trying to find that kind of generation and that kind of sports that are not really belong to the Olympic movement, like breakdance or some of those urban sports.
Look, I don't want to get into the individual nature of some of these sports, but the broader conclusion has to be that we must always be looking at trends, looking at what young people want. You don't shape your whole organization around what 14 or 15-year-olds think, but you do have to be alive to the way the world is changing, the way young people consume information. They consume entertainment. They even consume information around their own education. They're not just sitting there as passive spectators. They want the immersive experience. And all that is important. So, yeah, we do need to look at the program. But I am actually a fundamental believer that if you fund the international federations properly through the Olympic movement, and that isn't happening at the moment, then you will encourage and give the ability of those international federations to go out and do and make the innovative changes that will continue to excite people about those traditional sports. And it is very important that we don't suddenly sit there and go, well, one sport is not as popular as it was a few years ago.
Just only looking at the television.
What is it that
numbers.
we need to do in order to enable that sport to invest more in making those changes that allow people to actually maybe understand a little bit more about the extraordinary nature of that sport. So yes, it is a mixture of old and new, but it's a delicate balance. Right. But that balance can only be struck if you rebalance the movement towards sport, which is how we should be defining ourselves.
Okay, important issues, gender questions in sports. And if you look at the Paris Olympics, which finally reached the gender parity in number of participants, of course, this is on one side. On the other side, you could see the scandal, and I would say the scandal, what happened in the boxing event in the female category. And now having all those informations leaking out with two competitors, the Algerian and the Thai boxers, who actually won their weight group boxing against biological female, of course, this raises the question, and of course the IOC's standpoints we knew, but also your views regarding the future, because I think now at the moment the responsibility is given back to the international federations. But the question is whether the IOC should have their own standpoint regarding to defend biological females' rights to the fair competition.
There's a lot in that question.
Yes,
so let me, if I may,
Yeah.
unpack it for a moment.
Yes.
I think it's absolutely the right ambition to have achieved and realized in Paris, where we have gender parity across all our events. We have that in track and field.
Everybody was applauding that.
That's a good thing. It's absolutely the right thing to be doing. The gender balance on the field of play is not something that I think is the ultimate challenge. We're pretty much there. I do worry that in our governance structures, we really are not doing enough to create the pathways and the programs for women of ability to navigate their path through either coaching, technical officialdom, administrative involvement, even members of the International Olympic Committee. I'm very proud as president of World Athletics that we're one of the few organizations in the world to have an entirely gender balanced governing council. We have 26 members, 13 men, 13 women. That didn't come about because we sat there just with warm thoughts and wishing it would happen. It was actually drawn into our governance reforms. It was created as a constitutional imperative, and we got there 4 years in advance. And yes, it did need male advocacy. I hope in 5 years' time, I'm not having to say that, but it is really important. So alongside the governance structure that we need in the International Olympic Committee and the movement, we need more women. We need more women because that gives a diversity of thought, and it will help us be a world-class organization. When it comes to protecting the female category, that for me is non-negotiable.
I know. You are the very first one to do that.
If you do not have clear policies and frameworks that set the tone and the style and the substance for particularly our international federations, then you are going to lose women's sport. And that is something that none of us can sensibly contemplate with equanimity.
Do you think that actually the IOC made a mistake in Paris regarding the boxing events?
I think it was inevitable if you don't have policies that are clear-cut.
So it was a mistake.
I'm sorry, I have to say this.
Okay.
It is absolutely vital that biology in this sphere is the deciding factor. And once you start moving 1 or 2 degrees off due north, you end up with the circumstances that we witnessed in Paris.
And do we, who are trying to definitely advocate for protecting the female category,
have to fear of the fact that Kester Semenya or even the swimmer Leah Thomas went to even to the highest courts in Europe to try to defend their human rights, saying that it's kind of a discrimination of the human nature, that they are not eligible for female compensation. My worry at the moment, or my question is, what if that court, the highest court, will make a decision that can have a future instance for making other decisions for these sports? What do you think of that?
When we have been confronted by those challenges, and they have been tested in the Court of Arbitration, which is the supreme body that determines the outcome of these conflicts, they have always found in favour of us. But that's not to say that we literally just close the door. We actually have a working group on gender diversity in world athletics. We have a transgender athlete on that working group. So we need to continually, of course, as a responsible organisation, we need always to be open to changes in science or the cultural disposition of our communities. That's what a good organisation does. But you have to be really clear that the policies need to be understood, they need to be clear-cut, and there can be no ambiguity. And unless you have those policies in place, then you are going to drift into some very dangerous territory.
Do you think that the UN Special Rapporteur just about a month ago that made a special report on basically the discrimination, also the harassment of female athletes, which could be even by letting biological women competing against those who are, of course, born with a different sex. And in this suggestion, in this summary, basically, in this report was talking about suggesting either a third category for these competitors who want to compete in a different gender and different sex that they were born to, or opening up the males category in that sense. Do you think that would be a sensible way and something to be followed?
Look, as a responsible organisation, you won't be surprised when I tell you that we've looked very closely at a number of options. It was the considered view of our health and science teams, those both internal to the organisation and world experts external to the organisation. The science is very clear here. There is no ambiguity about that science. It is very clear. Yeah. And it was the considered opinion of both the executive board and the council. And my council is made up of Olympic champions, world record holders, coaches, educators. It's a very broad and cross-sectional group of people. And after considerable deliberation and thought, this was where we settled.
Okay. Let's talk about sports and politics. Today, when I listened to your speech regarding this fantastic new competition, the Ultimate World Championships coming to Hungary in 2026 September, you were very grateful to the Hungarian government and also of course, the embracing environment in Hungary. And of course, when we're talking about sports, you cannot talk about successful sport without an embracing governmental attitude and approach. And you found it in Hungary, and we're also definitely have a great use of that. But if you're talking about politics from a different perspective, from the perspective when politics interfere into sports, especially to the field of play, that I think is definitely something that we have to sort of open up in this discussion. I basically belong to the generation, as an Olympic athlete, who was deprived from the participation in the Los Angeles Olympic Games because of the socialist countries' boycott. Thankfully, you were there. You were there also in Moscow, winning an Olympic gold. So what do you think on that level about politics interfering in the sports and also into the field of play?
Well, interestingly, of course, I was in Moscow in 1980 as a competitor.
Right, I know. You didn't want to go
in deep opposition to the position that was taken by the government of the time in the United Kingdom, a government that I went on to serve in. So I have always been somebody that believes that the autonomy of sporting organisations to shape the future in the way that they best think they are suited to and in the best interest of sport is absolutely essential. But we don't live hermetically sealed from the landscape that we're in. And it is really important that we embrace politicians. And let's be clear, many of the benefits that we want, our stadiums, our world-class programs, our sport development programs, they are in large part funded by politicians who we will continue to persuade that an investment in that area is not just a good sports policy, it is the best health policy, the best education policy, the best policy you will ever have economically, and certainly for social cohesion. So all those things are important. And if you want to achieve that, you do, of course, have to work closely with politicians and governments. They have the purse strings. And it would be an appalling derogation of duty if we just sat there and said, well, it's politics, so we can't be involved. Of course, you have to be.
Of course.
But there are, of course, some balances to be struck. You know, in the same way that when a sponsor comes to the table, you will, of course, shape and work together. You may be asking, you may accept that from time to time, he who pays the piper calls the tune. What you don't want them doing is rewriting the symphony.
Right.
And this is why there is a balance. And I've been in politics. I've been a government minister. I've worked in politics at the highest level. I do understand what those balances are. I also understand the language. I also understand the challenges from time to time that politicians will confront when they're seeking re-election. All those are the practicalities that I really understand.
Yes, but if you're thinking about the Paris Olympics from that perspective, that the Russian and the Belarusian athletes could not compete under their own country's flag. Of course, they had an opportunity to compete if they were neutral, but who can really judge who is neutral? And the number of them were like, I don't know, 20 or very, very few compared to a Russian team. And the question is, how can you make a differentiation between war conflicts and war conflicts? Because there is another major conflict in the Gaza Strip. Of course, there are problems in Yemen, and you could look around like close to 100 different wars and conflicts going globally around. So my question is that, is it IOC's role to make a decision between what conflicts do we consider in a way that those athletes are not eligible for participation just by their countries, just by their origin?
Look, it is inevitable that you will have to confront geopolitical challenges. Yeah. And believe me, the world will be even more complicated over the next 10 years than it is now. I helped deliver games in London that I thought was a fairly complicated landscape. Compared to what we're now dealing with, that seemed pretty straightforward. And many of these challenges come at you very quickly and slightly unexpected. Most political situations are, if you look deeply, are not that surprising. Mm-hmm. You can see them maybe 3 or 4 years in advance. The ability of an organization to be able to see those particular challenges, but it is really important that you don't look down the wrong end of the telescope at this. It's very easy to sit there saying, well, of course, there's this conflict there, there's that. You can only deal with, frankly, what is in front of you. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you have to make those decisions, and that is what leadership is about. And occasionally, yes, you will set a precedent, but I've never been very good at the, well, what about argument, because if you adopt that as the core principle, you'll never make a decision.
Right. You had a chance to present the final presentation before the London bid. That basically was the moment when London won the possibility to organize the Olympic Games.
It comes back to my original point about what are the members there for.
Right.
I do think it is important that the candidates be given every opportunity to share their views, their thoughts, and actually, most importantly, listen. Because
yes,
the criticality of an election is not just about who emerges as the president of a sport. It should be the opportunity to have a collective discussion and global discussion, in a way, about the challenges that sit ahead of us. And again, I guess it's just my concern that these are issues that at the moment are not being shaped by the membership. And I think, in a way, the election is a little totemic of that.
Sir, thank you so much for the opportunity, and good luck for not just for the manifesto, but also all the way in your candidacy.
Thank you.
Thank you.